Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In his name I begin. Peace and blessings be upon our Holy Prophet Muhammad and his holy progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all. We'd like to congratulate the Imam of our time for the blessed births of Lady Fatemeh Masuma and of Imam Ali Rida alayhi salam. I'm Barak Hussein, registered psychotherapist, the Muslim counselor. And on behalf of the Islamic Shia Ithna Ashari Association of Edmonton, ISIA, we'd like to welcome you once again to The Mindful Muslim. It is an online series with monthly episodes exploring mind-provoking discussions with special guests on topics that are relevant to you. We'll be looking at all sorts of topics, discussing social, psychological, cultural, mental health, religious, familial, and current matters. Our episode today will be exploring Bill 21, its impact on our roles in this society that we live in. Bill 21 is not some vague bill. It has actually become a law now that has no bearing on our lives. It is a law which bans public workers in positions of authority from wearing religious symbols, and it has impacted the lives of thousands across Canada. Sister Fatemeh Anvari, a former school teacher in Quebec, had to choose to either remove her headscarf or lose the job that she loved. The Mindful Muslim will explore and discuss its implications today and its impact on Ms Anvari, as well as potentially on all of our lives. And joining us today is Ms Anvari herself. And welcome, Sister Fatemeh. She is an Iranian Canadian living in Quebec. She is currently working on her Master of Arts in Education, and she's focusing on the experiences of educating a child with Down syndrome. She's a former teacher and a current student life animator working with students on diversity. Assalamu alaikum, Sister. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
Alaikum salam. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I hope that the discussion today will resonate with the audience.
Inshallah. And thank you so much for taking your time and effort. And I know preparing ahead of time for this as well, because as we know, it's a very delicate, sensitive, could be very provoking topic as well. So we took our time to really exploring how we wanted to discuss this so that everybody, inshallah, could benefit and learn from this. So we want to begin, Fatemeh, also looking at, what happened. Can you describe what occurred? Because all of a sudden, I remember we saw your picture blow up all over social media, all over the news, whether it was politicians who were talking about it, religious scholars, or just regular people were really involved in this because it triggered a lot of emotions and thoughts in people. And it's very much so a topic worthy of discussion and exploring because it does have impacts on all of us. So before we begin the discussion, let's talk about what exactly happened and then how you got here today, basically.
Yeah. So to start off, I mean, I had the job since late October. I had been working for the school board as a supply teacher since March 2021, and I got the offer to go in for an interview without even having applied for it myself directly, to go in for an interview. And I was told that I was, recommended by the principals of the schools that I had worked at as a supply teacher, and I'd actually worked at this particular school before as well. And it was for a part-time position, teaching English language arts for grade 3. And also I was also the homeroom teacher, so I had homeroom duties as well. And, I'd been waiting for this opportunity my whole life to have my own classroom, to be able to create lesson plans of my own and to have my own students.
Of course.
And I had done that before when I was living in Iran for a few years. I had that experience as well, and I was excited to start it off here as well. So I was able to get the job. I got the offer, and I very willingly, obviously, accepted, and I started in late October. We had class pictures taken just the week that I started, coincidentally. So, the parents saw what I looked like. There were never any complaints. There were never any hostility from any of the colleagues or the parents or students alike.
Yeah.
It was always positive reactions.
And the school, sorry, Fatemeh, the school itself, did it have diversity in there? Were you the only one who was a visible minority with a headscarf?
Amongst the people in the building, yes. I know that there are one or two parents who do wear a headscarf, a hijab, but it's not in the building. I was the only one in the building with a hijab, although I know that we do have Muslim students,
Right.
and also of other backgrounds as well.
Right. Okay.
But it is a majority, a white population, a majority white population in the school. And then in early December, I was told that I could potentially, lose the job because of this issue.
Right.
Um, and that it wasn't, our principal, she was very clear that, this wasn't something that she agreed with at all. And no, like, she saw me in the interview, right? I was wearing a hijab in the interview. So
Exactly.
she wouldn't have hired me if she was in any way in agreement with this law. So I was able to, um, kind of think about it for a little bit, see what I could do. Obviously, immediately, even before being asked, I said, well, I'm not willing to take it off. It's not an option, meaning I'm not giving that option. I don't want to take it off in any way. And I told them, it goes beyond religion for me. It's not something that I believe is the only thing that would make someone Muslim, right? That we have a lot of
Exactly.
people who don't identify with it and who are Muslim, practicing Muslims. But for me, it's just my own identity. It's just myself. It's just how I've presented myself, and this is how I feel comfortable presenting myself. But regardless, I was told that regardless of what I define it as, it is ultimately a religious symbol. And not by our principal, but she told the people above her, I guess. And they got back with this message. So I did lose the job instantly, and I
Wow.
couldn't tell people at first because, I didn't know.
How do you even begin to talk about that? I
Yeah,
lost my job because I wear a hijab and I chose to continue
yeah,
wearing it.
exactly. And
Yes,
you can't tell the students because you don't know how would you talk about that? I didn't
absolutely.
know if such a sensitive topic was even talked about with them in any shape or form in the past. So I didn't feel comfortable touching on it at all. So, it took a few days and they eventually found out. Parents found out and they started having these conversations with their kids, and kind of went from there.
And so from that point on till now,
Mhm.
um, how did it impact you? How did you deal with it? What would you say to others, those in terms of the people close to you or the community and how you were able to deal with the situation?
Um, I think for me, I turned to the people that were closest to me. That was my immediate response, kind of to try to get that emotional support that I was looking for. And that was actually not the initial response. The initial response would have been utter shock. I didn't know what to do. Our principal immediately suggested this other job that I would do at the school, which is the job I'm doing right now,
Right,
which was working on diversity with the kids, in a position called student life animator, where I would fall in the category of professional, and I
right,
wouldn't be teacher, so I wouldn't be deemed in a position of quote unquote authority. So I wouldn't fall under the law.
right. So because a teacher is considered a
Yes.
role of authority.
Yes, teachers,
Mhm.
principals, vice principals, they're considered in positions of authority. But she suggested this one, and how I dealt with it myself, with how everything that was happening. Um, I had to be very careful of what I said. This is such a sensitive issue. It's
Right,
been talked about before as well. But just, I guess, getting the support from the people closest to me, and seeing the support from the colleagues, from the community, the kids stood up and they talked about it. And,
bless
you
them.
know, I think seeing their reactions played a huge role in me speaking out about the situation as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Just because I wouldn't have had that courage to talk about it at all, because I didn't know what the reaction would be, what people would say.
of
But
course.
seeing that people were so supportive kind of gave me that courage to speak out about it. And I
Alhamdulillah.
think that, yeah, and I think that people were seeing, because it was happening to a teacher who already had a job. Like, keep in mind, this has been affecting people for a couple of years now, for 3 years now.
Yes.
In that,
And there were protests in the community, and it's not just from Muslims, it was
right,
from people who
exactly,
didn't agree with it and people who of different faiths whom it
yeah,
affected. Yes.
exactly. I mean, this law has been in effect since 2019, right? So
Mm,
it has been it doesn't affect people who they're grandfathered in. So it doesn't affect people who were already a teacher before 2019, but consider someone who graduates in 2019 and is looking to start working in Quebec.
Exactly.
Like Amrit Kaur is the most well-known case who had to leave Quebec for BC and pursue teaching jobs there because she wears a turban as part of her Sikh faith. So it has been affecting people for a long time, but I think this was the first time when it was so well known that somebody who was already in a teaching position was losing it. I've heard that there are already other cases as well, but that they weren't so made public, they weren't really spoken out about. And I think that the power of this one was kind of the role that they played was that it was people who weren't people in hijabs, turbans, or kippas. It was people who were indirectly affected by it through, their kids being in the school and seeing this as an example. Like parents were choking up. Yeah. They were crying on TV, on the radio, because they were like, what do you say? That's not the example we want to set to these kids.
Exactly.
We talk to them about diversity. We try to have open-minded children, and then something like this happens and it's legally justified.
Justified, yeah. It's going to be implemented at so many levels, and especially considering we live in Canada. You wouldn't think these things actually happen in Canada, yet I think we were chatting about this the other day. You and I, we were saying that here in Canada has the highest number of Islamophobic attacks here in Canada.
Oh,
which is no, it wasn't us. I think it was a
no,
colleague of mine at work.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So you can imagine. So that, I mean, we can discuss a little bit more later, but it's interesting how, how do you talk about this to the children? I could see how the parents were affected by this. It hit a nerve, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that for me, that was kind of, it's a very telling sign of what this law stands for when you see kids standing up against it.
Absolutely.
Because they don't have that discriminatory, I guess, nature in them.
They're not born with it, right? It comes later.
We're not born
impacted later.
Exactly. We're not born racist. We're not born disrespectful. We learn these things. We learn that people are different. Like we are taught that people are different eventually. Lack of representation. There's a lot of things that contribute to it. And we will talk about that after as well.
Yes, yeah.
But when they're so confused, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand that this is wrong. I think that says a lot about whether this law is right or not,
And then how it impacts them rather from a mental health perspective. Imagine those kids, young kids who, let's say one day who want to wear the hijab or already wearing the hijab. How is this going to impact them? Or let's say not even Muslims, but if you're looking at the Jewish faith, you're looking at the Sikh faith, or let's say somebody who wants to wear a cross for the love of their faith, like, because these are the religious symbols that are visible that people wear and identify with according to their faith. How mentally would that impact them? How did it impact you, Fatemeh, like from a mental health perspective, right?
It was such a strange feeling because it was obviously at first it felt very lonely, right? It felt very depressing. And I remember the day that I was driving back from school, the day that this had started, and I was told that I could potentially lose it. It wasn't even for certain yet, but I remember I was crying so much in the car I couldn't even see the road, and I somehow made it home safely, even though my eyes were so teary I couldn't see the road. And I remember thinking in the car, like, how unfair it is that we are thought about in this way, that we are so marginalized and so demonized when all we are is just people. That's all it is at the end of the day, that we are all just people. And I think the role of every religion is ultimately to lead us to harmony, to coexist with everybody in a peaceful manner. No religion actively promotes, discrimination. But it's the way that we interpret it. And it's just sad to me. It was really, really sad to think about how we're not even given the chance to present ourselves in the way that we see fit, in the way that we truly identify with, but that we're judged before even being given the chance. I think that was what really affected me. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so where are you now, so to speak? Not from a mental wellness perspective. And alhamdulillah, you seem, stronger. You've kind of, I wouldn't say made peace with the bill, no, but you're working around it, so to speak. You're working in a different role and position now that still allows you to be with children and educate them, but not in that position of authority. So where do you see yourself moving forward with the fact that you still live in Quebec right now and this law is still there?
I think that we need to get creative when things like this happen as a community, like when our hands are tied by the law. What are some other things we can do to work around these limitations?
Exactly. Like, what's our role? What can we
Yeah.
do within the limitations? Yeah.
And I think that there are different levels where we can play a role. There's the individual level. We can work towards awareness. We can work towards educating, towards, educating ourselves. This prompted people to really talk about this for the first time, even though this was
Yeah.
around for a while, right? But until it was seen like this,
Yeah.
I think it didn't affect me as much until I saw it. Being a Muslim woman, like I heard about it, I was like, oh my gosh, it's a terrible law. And I was working in an English school, and I was under the impression it didn't affect Article 23 schools, which means that the English language minorities in Quebec have some freedoms to make their own laws, to make their own rules. And, the reason that I had to be reassigned to a different role was because of a November 9th ruling in Quebec, which said, no, it applies to everybody.
Everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of why. Yeah, I think that is kind of that played a role for sure.
And so, what can we do moving forward? As a society, as Muslims, of people of different faiths who do wear articles of clothing that publicly, are in positions of authority, you could say. What do we need to do? What needs to be done to allow this freedom to practice our own faith and religion and beliefs?
Honestly, I think that it comes down to each person deciding, right, whether they wish to remove their religious symbol during the times they work, or to change provinces or change careers. It's a sad reality, but that's ultimately what it comes down to at some levels. But then what can we do to work around it? We can change careers, which is not easy. It's obviously easy to say, but not easy
Yeah,
to
and
do.
you put so much effort and time, and it could have been a dream that you've always wanted to be a teacher
Absolutely.
or whatever other positions of authority, yet here
Mhm.
you are being told you cannot because
Yes,
you wear such and such.
yes, exactly. So I think it's just a sad reality for the time being, at least. But alongside that, what can we do? I think that something that was done in our school was that I was given this new position to work on diversity, actually, to specifically address these. I was encouraged to talk about this bill with the kids.
Oh,
And the kids were so, like, they're little activists. They were so well spoken. And one of the kids, every time I went to their classroom, he found an opportunity to tell me he cannot stand this law.
oh, bless him.
And I remember in an interview on TV, he made this really intelligent remark, that, a lot of adults were shaken at how, a
Mm,
12-year-old is making such remarks. He said, it's wrong because it forces one way of thinking. And I think it's so
mm.
simple. And it's as simple
So
as that.
profound. It's so
It's so
profound.
profound. It's so simple yet so profound. It promotes one way of thinking. It forces, not promotes, one way
Yeah,
of thinking,
yeah, forces.
while, um, I guess, suppressing or oppressing other ways of thinking in
Exactly.
some way. So, to see what we can do to educate ourselves, to truly be diverse. If our schools don't allow that, what else are we doing? If our places of work don't allow that, because doctors, lawyers, judges, they can't wear religious symbols. This affects a lot of jobs.
Yes,
Supervisors and a lot of other positions, I'm sure,
yes.
who have some sort of authority are affected. So to kind of look at what we can do, each of us, each person in those positions of authority who are able to continue because they do not wear a religious symbol, what are they doing to kind of give back? Because there are so many who are deprived of this opportunity, and everybody else is deprived of the opportunity of openness and being around other people who do not look like them, and which is something that we need.
Yeah, it just gets you thinking that what if, for example, you are somebody of a religious minority who needs to live in Quebec, let's say, because you function in that language,
Mhm.
right? And then you are in a position of authority to help others, to educate others, to heal others. And then now all of a sudden you have to switch jobs, careers, uproot yourself and go somewhere else. That there's a lot of implications there for sure. And
Yeah.
um, all because of what your student said, that one way of thinking.
Yeah. And we think that, oh, it's a law, we can't do anything about it, which isn't right. We have a voice. We all
Yeah.
have a voice.
Yeah.
And if this is our country, then we have a right and we have an obligation, if I will, to actually speak out against injustice, right? People were writing to the government to, ask for
Absolutely.
answers
I
to.
remember when letters started circulating from different organizations, we were sending them around. I remember we had long chats about this as well at the time. If anything, it probably even brought us even closer as friends during
Yeah.
that time frame. And I remember you were telling me how the children were standing up, but they were also showing so much love and support. Do you have you wanted to share some of the pictures and the cards and the letters the kids have shown?
Yes, I have one here that came from not one of the students in my class, but a different class. But I think that, again, it's one of those things that's so simple and profound at the same
Wow.
time. Rights should be equal to everyone. And when we think about it, we're like, yeah, that's so obvious. But yet it's not being actually enacted, right? We're not seeing this happen. Why should someone have more rights than another person just because of the nature of their faith or the nature of their identity?
Yeah.
Right? So I think there is a lot of things we can do. 8-year-olds, my students were writing letters to the government, and one of them was her mom said, she's sad that she can't do more. And it
No.
took 2.5 days from the story being published in a local paper for it to get the prime minister's reaction. And they were saying, we are overwhelmed by the number of letters that's being received. So
Yeah.
it's not something that is that is in,
Isolated.
insignificant. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
not insignificant. Every act matters, right? Because we all have a voice. We just need to figure out what to do with it, and to use it.
And that's the thing. I think showing through protests, yes, you're showing your right to express how you feel, but that's not going to change policy or bill or anything. It truly is reaching out to those who are in positions of power, the elected ones that we put in the office, so to speak, and say, hey, this is not okay. This is not right. Doesn't represent us here as Canadians of all places in the world. And this is the sad part. And I remember seeing news reaching as far as in the Middle East,
Mhm.
Muslim woman in Canada being forced to take off her hijab. I
Yeah,
saw the headlines in our countries
yeah.
about this issue, and it was mind-boggling. I saw a lot of religious scholars also were sharing about this,
Mm,
and they live in different parts of the world as well, saying, "Look what's happening here in Canada of all places." But it's
yes.
not representative of Canada at all. It is one province in Canada
Mhm.
that is implementing this law, and it's already there. And like you said, now that it's in place, what can people do other than change provinces, find different positions? But I'm thinking about, well, how can you change yourself as a doctor if you're a medical doctor practitioner for years? You've got your own practice, you're working in the hospital, you're a surgeon saving lives, and now
Yeah.
you cannot save lives because there's a law that says you cannot wear a yarmulke or a turban or a cross or a hijab in the position that you're in.
And keep in mind, this is happening when we have a shortage of teachers. At least I know from a teacher's
Yes.
perspective, we have a shortage of teachers in Quebec.
Mhm.
They're getting parents to come supply teach because they don't have enough teachers. And maybe this is the case in other jobs as well. I'm not aware, but none of that matters to the law, right? None of that
No, it
matters.
doesn't. It
Like you
doesn't.
said, they can't save lives, something as important as saving lives, just because they identify as someone who wears a religious symbol.
Absolutely. As we're chatting about this, I remember a group of girls on one of my trips to Iraq,
Mhm.
and we were inside of one of the holy shrines, and I heard French. And
Mm,
I'm always excited when I go travel. I'm excited to hear Arabic here, but when I go, like, my mother tongue, and when I go abroad, like to hear my second language heard, or a third language, because I speak both. And I turned around and I saw these group of girls, and I asked in French. I spoke French to them when they were talking to each other. I just couldn't resist, and I said, "Where are you from?" And they said they were from France. And by then, we know France has implemented the exact same laws that people with religious symbols cannot work in the public, like, period, like in the government, in the public. So not even positions of authority, any job. And we know there's a lot going on there, for example, with bans on women who are choosing to wear, let's say, swimwear that is full coverage,
mm,
banned, and it got overturned in one city a few weeks ago. But now the national government is trying to reverse that. Right? It was such a joy to see the women celebrating their right,
mm,
like, even if people don't choose to wear it publicly, their right to wearing it. And it made so many people who were supporting it, who were of different faiths, just deliriously happy when we saw the footage. But then now it's going to be squashed again. But I remember those sisters, when we were chatting, I said, "What do you do? Does this affect you? How does this affect you?" And she said, "Yes, it does affect me, and I'm a nurse, a senior nurse program coordinator." Like, she's in a high position as a nurse. And I said, "Well, what do you do?" And she said, "Well, as soon as I get to my work, I have my hijab. As soon as before I get into the building, I actually take off my hijab and I go in, I do my work for the day. And as soon as I leave, I put it back on." And we're standing in front of, I think, the shrine of Imam Hussein or Al Abbas alayhim salam, and having this discussion. When you think about, for example, I know this is not our area topic, but just, to connect it from a spiritual
mhm,
level, like, for example, our role models, Layda Zainab, for example, who fought for the rights of the faith and so on and so forth. One of which, if it wasn't for her, for example, you and I wouldn't be wearing the hijab today. She protected that, right?
mm,
And so, standing in that area where all of this took place, I'm speaking with somebody who lives in a Western country where this law is being enforced, that you cannot wear this symbol. And it was so surreal having that discussion with her. And I said, "Well, how does it make you feel?" Basic question. She said, "I feel really sad.
yeah,
I feel
yeah,
powerless and I feel really sad, but
yeah,
this is what I do. I take it off as soon as I walk in. I do my work." Can you imagine the pressure, the
yeah,
shame, the all that negativity while you're trying to do your job? And this is a position of helping people,
yes,
and then having to leave back out and putting it on after people have seen you. It just strikes me that, people are being forced to undress against their will.
yes,
In
yes,
the case of the hijab, for example, because the idea behind it is to cover
mhm,
certain parts of you,
mhm,
and then here you are being forced to expose parts of you. And as a woman, I know this bill affects men, not just women, but let's explore this, going off of this. You and I have always had interesting chats about this. As women as well,
mhm,
we being forced to unclothe in front of other men in
yeah,
a country that gives you the freedom to live as you want to live.
mhm.
The
Yeah,
implications behind that. Wow.
it's like you have the freedom not to wear it, but you don't have the freedom to wear it. How is that freedom? That is not freedom in and of itself, is the
No,
freedom to choose. So whether you're being forced to wear it or forced not to wear it, both are equally wrong. And
both
this
are
is, in
equally
our case,
wrong.
like you said, it affects men too. It's a case of human rights, right?
Yes,
For us, it's
yes,
a case of women's rights. Who is that man in that position of power? When I say that man, I mean the men who
who
choose
decided this, yeah.
decide for this.
And there could have been women, by the way, there could have been women in that as well, yeah,
But to police my body, to police my choice of wearing what I wanna wear is just mind-boggling to me
absolutely.
that we are having this conversation in this day and age. It
Absolutely.
is so simple and yet so, you know,
It's so
um,
many layers, so many
yeah,
layers when we look at
overloaded.
it. It's
Yeah.
like the right to choose your faith, the right to choose how you express that, the right to choose what you want to wear or not wear.
Mhm.
You know, there's so much implications around the hijab that people are deciding how we should wear it or if we should wear it and where we should wear it. And then, like we said in the beginning, choosing your job over your faith if you live there.
Yeah.
Definitely
Yeah.
so many layers, so many like so much impact in terms of what do you need to do? Alhamdulillah, you were able to kind of, you were very blessed and lucky, I would say, in the position that you're in, the community that you're in, and how people were against it, and the staff, the families, they supported you. And, you know, I see you're doing this because they truly did support you and love you and were just aghast against this. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, they were, writing letters to the government. They did the whole green ribbon thing where they tied green ribbons to the school fence, and then other schools were doing it and sending me emails with pictures of their school. A school sent me a copy of The Proudest Blue, um,
Yes. It's a
and they
wonderful
signed
book.
it. Yeah, they signed it. The teachers and the students, they signed the book, and they also sent me cards, letters. Um, Parents whose kids were not even my students were organizing protests, and all of this was just, it's so heartwarming. So, that's why I say I had such a mix of different feelings. Like, I was feeling sad, and at the same time I was feeling empowered, and I felt this duty to, like, talk about it because people were talking about it.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
in spheres where they normally would not be talking about the hijab or religion in general, I think all of a sudden, I remember we were having this discussion where you were saying all of a sudden I was pushed as the, what was the word? Symbol, I guess,
Mm,
the symbol of what this law was all about.
mm,
And for you, it was no, it's not about me as Fatima, but as
mm.
me as a woman wearing this, and what it means to all the women and the men who are going to be impacted by it,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Um, one of the things that one of the cards that one of my students gave me, she made a little book inside it and they, like, glued it to the card. And when you flip through the pages, she wrote nice things about me. And the book was titled Nice Things About Miss Fatima. And then you would
Uh,
flip the pages, and each page had an adjective: marvelous, nice, things like that. And then on the last page, she wrote, oh, one of the pages, by the way, said a real teacher. This is an 8-year-old, keep in mind.
wow,
This is an 8-year-old.
mashallah.
And on the last page, she wrote a person. Like, it was
Wow.
all adjectives. And then at the end, a person. And I'm
Wow.
like, this kid has so much to teach us, and we have so much to learn from this 8-year-old. That,
Wow, this says so much because, like you said earlier, Fatima, that children are not born, and we know this from psychology, they're not born with a hatred or of discrimination and racism or any other ism. This is something they learn along the way. And this 8-year-old sees you as a person with the hijab as opposed to somebody who is a threat of some sort or of influence in a negative way. I mean, if anything, people, Muslims, you know, we're speaking to our experience as Muslims. We cannot speak on behalf of other faiths who represent themselves as well. But as Muslims, you know, and especially women, I think there's been a lot of flack over the last few years in the media, in the workplace, and just with the attitudes that we have towards us as oppressed women, especially by the men in our families and our countries, et cetera, et cetera. However, a lot of women are high-powered women, educated, are in positions of power and influence independent of their hijab. That's just who they are as people. Like your 8-year-old student said, they are people who happen to show their faith, but you know, this is still here, that's still here, that's still who they are. Yet this law discriminates and says, no, you are not such a thing. Again, so much around that we could explore and take a look at. And I wanted to ask, you know, as an educator and an individual who's been affected by this whole situation, what can you say regarding the comments on how wearing a religious symbol in a classroom goes against the secularist nature of public service jobs?
I think that we really need to understand there's a lot of history behind the idea of secularism or laïcité that they call in Quebec. But I think that, and I understand the reasoning behind secularism. I believe in secularism in public schools, right? Precisely because I want to see students being able to express themselves in the way that they want to express themselves, right? And no way of thinking should be forced upon anybody else with other ways of thinking.
Absolutely.
And so I think that my classroom was secular. I was just me.
Exactly.
One of my students, his mom wrote an op-ed in the Globe and Mail back then. I think it was in January, where she talked about how, the classroom was secular. My teaching was secular. I was just being myself. That's all I was. I was not talking about my hijab. I was not, and mind you, if I even was talking about my hijab, if I'm clearly saying, hey, this is a personal experience I'm sharing, that promotes the the sharing of personal experience, the openness, the being able to express ourselves. And I think that it's really contradictory when we say, the class teaching with, I saw someone on Twitter comment, if every lesson starts with a hijab, then ultimately it is about a hijab.
Of course.
No, I actually don't agree with that, because how is my lesson about a hijab, right? Because
no, if you talk about it, then it will be, but you're just there with it.
She was saying, if I exist there with my hijab, ultimately my lesson is about the hijab.
No, of course not. Sorry, no.
I'm there. Yeah, if I'm there as a woman, is my lesson about feminism? Is my lesson about women's rights? I could be talking about seasons. I could be talking about fruits and vegetables.
Exactly.
It sounds funny to even talk about it, but I just think it's so simple.
Exactly.
And, I think that we just need to understand that being ourselves does not mean that we're not secular. It's precisely expression, freedom of expression, freedom of choice, being who we are, and expressing ourselves in the way that we feel comfortable. And that's all it comes down to. And I go back to that student's comment, the 11-year-old who said, it's wrong because you force one way of thinking.
Exactly.
Right? So that how is that secular? Because a lot of people, they might even have a faith, right? But they don't show it visibly.
Exactly. Yeah.
We have a lot of Muslim women who are practicing Muslims who just don't feel comfortable with the hijab for whatever personal reason that is. But one way of thinking is being forced on people who choose to wear that article of clothing in their place of work.
And the Globe and Mail recently had written an article that we're sharing on the screen. We're going to try and put it in the chat for those who are watching. You can also watch it, check this out. And it was a great article where they were describing, like you said, the Bill 21 failed Fatemeh Anvari, but it also failed her student, like this woman's son, and Quebec secularist like her. So this was an opinion editorial, an op-ed, which has become a very famous word these days that we're hearing in the media, where this woman, Aden Seaton, had written. So you can check out the article where she talks about how it affected her children. And this is a woman who identifies as a secularist, and she's of a Jewish faith herself. So it's interesting to see how, again, it's not just impacting Muslims, it's impacting anybody who identifies visibly as a faith and how they represent themselves. And so check this article out where it gets into a little bit more detail about what happened. And there's a lot more articles out there that discuss about what happened to Sister Fatima and how it can impact a lot of us on so many other levels as well. Yeah. You know, again, there's so much to explore with this, and probably a lot of people think, this doesn't really affect me. What's the point of this? Well, why should I care? So I want to ask you this question, Fatima, to people out there. Why should we care about Bill 21? Because I also remember at the time when the protests were happening in Quebec, when this, and that, we weren't really impacted living here in Ontario, right? But what could we say to somebody, why should you care, given that you don't live here or it's not going to impact you directly? Why should you care about this bill?
I think I can speak from an educational perspective on this. When we don't have that representation in our schools or other places of public service, what it leads to is not knowing people for who they are. And our only source becomes the media, how we're being represented in the media.
Exactly.
And I work with kids. Like I said, kids don't have these biases against people, right? About people. And when they grow up, they go out into the larger community, outside of their school, outside of their neighborhood. They work with people who look different. And I think it's fair to assume that they would be scared, sometimes even, because we all know we're not being represented accurately in the media.
Absolutely.
We are being represented as oppressed women.
Exactly.
And, there are some people who try to be sympathetic even, and they come up to us sometimes. I haven't personally had an experience, but I've heard from other Muslim women who wear hijab.
Yeah.
Where people come up to them and they say, you're in a free country now. You can take it off.
As though we've been forced to wearing it.
Yeah, as if we were all forced to wear it. Well, could you assume for a second that this might be my choice to wear it? Could you respect that for me?
Exactly.
And, I think that all it comes down to is how we are as a society as a whole. How much do we allow for people to tell us their authentic stories before believing what others tell us about them? We cannot assume anything about anybody's experience before hearing it firsthand from them, before seeing it be presented to us from the authentic source, which is the person themselves.
Their lived experience of it.
Exactly, that lived experience of it. I had an interesting activity that I did for Asian Heritage Month in May with the kids.
Yeah.
I mean, Asian Heritage Month includes all of Asia, right? So I said, you know what, I am a person from a country in Asia, and I had a difficult time coming up with an activity because I wanted to talk about stereotypes, but I didn't want to trigger anything.
Of course.
And any
fine
students,
line.
Exactly. I didn't want to trigger anything in students who might have had negative experiences. And I said, you know what? I can use myself. I went into the classroom and I said, I'm going to give you all a little piece of paper, and I want you to imagine that I have walked into this room for the first time ever. You have not seen me before. I haven't even started talking. You don't know what I sound like. You don't know what language I speak. You don't know how I talk. I want you to write your assumptions on here. And it was so interesting because some of the kids were confused. And I told them it'll be anonymous, by the way. I won't know what you write. Yeah. Some were confused. Some said, I don't assume anything. I don't understand. What am I?
That's the triggering part right there.
Yeah, it was like, they didn't have the bias. They just saw me. And one of them, when she said, I don't know what to write, I said, well, just write that. Just write, I don't assume anything. And she wrote, I just see you. And she drew a heart around it. And it's so profound seeing these from the kids. And some of the kids said, I don't want to offend you. And I said, no, you're not going to write anything hurtful on there. You're just going to assume my language, my nationality, which for a lot of them was, I think you speak Arabic, which is true for a lot of women who wear hijab, but not true for me because I'm originally from Iran, so I speak Persian. That was such an interesting experience for me, having that conversation with the kids and seeing how they don't have such assumptions. They see you as you. During the time I worked as a supply teacher or as a teacher of my own classroom, not one student asked me, why I wear a hijab. One student, because she had not seen anybody in a hijab before, she asked me if I lived in Canada.
Oh,
And
that's cute. That's so cute.
cute. I see it as curiosity when it comes from children, right?
Exactly.
Um,
Curiosity, not assumptions and prejudice. And
exactly. It's
yes.
curiosity. None of the kids even once asked me if like why I wear hijab, except in one situation where the subject was brought up because there was a character in a storybook that I was reading to them that seemed to have something on her head, like a little scarf, but it wasn't because it wasn't a hijab. Um, and it kind of went from there, and she said, why do you wear that? And I kind of tried to change the conversation, change the subject, but
Mhm.
never once did the students think that I looked different or
So
weird.
interesting. Despite the fact that you have something obviously on your head that it sets you apart different that way, they did not see you as different. I have an interesting, a different question. Do you think because you speak fluent English, Canadian English with no
Mhm.
accent, do you think if you had a slight accent, that could have maybe have changed things? I notice when I speak English and approach people or people approach me, whether it's in my work or shopping or whatever, and I speak perfect English, so to speak, to the standard here,
Mhm.
I get looked at differently, I feel.
Yes.
Do you think
I
that
um I can only assume, because I don't have the experience of
yeah,
talking in an accent and seeing how people respond. But I can only
right.
assume that this is a privilege in and of itself. And when we
Absolutely.
talk about privilege, we're not saying it doesn't mean that it's a positive and people who have an accent is a negative.
Yes,
Privilege in and of itself means something that you have because somebody else does not.
exactly.
Um, it's the opportunity that you might have, when you speak to someone in public, that they see, oh, okay, she's probably born here. So for them, it's like they might not see you as an immigrant, which in my case, I actually am an immigrant. I didn't speak English until I was 10 years old, and
Mhm.
when we moved to Canada. So it is something that might bring people to assume things about you because of the way you speak.
Yes,
It's interesting in education. There's actually a lot of discussion on language policing and
right.
how we take one kind of speaking to be appropriate, to be correct, whereas other
The
kinds,
norm, the
the
norm.
norm,
Yeah.
whereas other kinds are getting the message across, while speaking differently. People have different dialects, people have different accents.
Yep.
And a lot of the times, language policing kind of the opposite of empower. Do we have the word disempower?
Yeah, yeah.
Disempowers kids to express themselves because they feel like their English is not perfect. Whereas,
My
you
goodness.
know,
Yeah.
accent doesn't have anything to do with perfect English. And perfect English doesn't necessarily have anything to do with getting your message across effectively. You could speak in broken English, but get the message across and have extremely intelligent things to say, right? So it
Absolutely.
really doesn't have anything to do with it. And again, that's something that is, I think, we're conditioned to think based on things being presented to us in the media. When we see people speak in an accent, they're usually that poor bullied person.
Exactly.
And it's
Or
just
the uneducated person, the
for the
assumptions, even though you have highly qualified, highly trained, educated people.
mhm,
And this brings us back again to why should we care about this? Because if this, and it is implemented as law, it's going to trickle out into the rest of the country in terms of the assumptions, the discriminations, the that could potentially lead to what we have seen already happening. And it's been a year since the horrific terrorist attack and discriminatory and Islamophobic attack on the London family, the Afzal family in London, Ontario. And I know this week has been a very emotional week for a lot of people, especially those who attended the vigil that took place earlier this week. The Thursday night is when it took place, and we also had a program talking about the impact of such attacks and discrimination and as a visible minority. So even though you don't live in Quebec, you can see how and why we should care, right? Because this can trickle down across wherever you may live across Canada. I mean, we see this already in the States, the hate that's there against people who are Muslims, who are Blacks, or Hispanics. I mean, just recently, a lot of questions came up why, for example, that school in Texas, right? Yes, where those poor souls, the children there, why did they not get the help sooner? Was it because there were there were assumptions in people's heads and positions of authority? Like, we don't know, we can assume ourselves, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So this is an opinion question that was sent. I'm going to read it and then you can reframe it however you like, Fatemeh, to answer it if you're not comfortable answering it the way. But this was sent in just right now. Do you think that Bill 21 will ever become Canadian wide and not just a Quebec issue? In other words, is this a Quebec issue or a Canadian issue based on your experience and how you want to answer this question?
I think from my experience and from what I saw, the reaction from other parts of Canada, um, I don't think it'll ever become a law that will be Canadian wide.
Yes.
At least I can hope. But based on what I've seen, is not something that most of Canada agrees with, and there are a lot of people in Quebec who do not agree with it. But I think that it does affect us in whatever province we live,
Yes.
because it affects our country as a whole of how we see people. You know, Quebec is a part of Canada. We're all living in the same country. We're sharing this space. We're sharing a lot of um, a lot of the things. We move, we mobilize afterwards. We go to other provinces. It really does affect the way that people see others. I think for sure.
Mhm.
We can all use our voice to speak out against it.
Absolutely. And do you think that this is an opportunity? This is another question. The questions are finally coming in from our audiences who are watching. Is this an opportunity for Muslims, Sikhs, Jews, Christians, and other faiths to come together to fight this?
Oh, 100%. I think it's
Yeah.
a not a well, I don't want to say it's a beautiful opportunity, like this bill is giving us this beautiful opportunity, but I
Yeah.
think we can use it to come together and say, what, it's not a Muslim issue. It's not just a Jewish issue. It's not just a
Exactly.
Sikh issue. It's not just a Catholic issue. If anybody's wearing a cross, it's a human rights issue.
Exactly.
People who wear religious symbols are disproportionately affected. That's all it comes down to, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Muslim men are not affected. Muslim men are not affected. What are Muslim men doing? Are they speaking out against this?
Exactly.
I think that we to come together will be such a beautiful thing, to speak out, all of us, to say we're not trying to push our own ideologies on anybody. I'm not
Exactly.
trying to push my religion on anybody. I want
Exactly.
to be there with
Which is one of the premise of this law is that you were standing there with this, you are going to tell others how to live this way.
yes, which is
Yeah.
untrue. I if there's ever an opportunity, a collective of people from different faiths coming together and doing something on this, I would sign up for that.
And have you seen, Fatima, any push for faiths to come together or centers from our, let's say, cultural religious centers or even outside of our own centers, like the greater Canadian community, from your experience from December until now?
Not particularly regarding this case, but I attended a panel in McGill
Yeah.
in March, where I had the privilege of being in the same panel with such amazing people. One of whom was a Jewish rabbi, a female Jewish rabbi who wears a kippah.
A female Jewish rabbi. Wow.
A very powerful figure in Canada, Rabbi Lisa Grishkow. She talked about an initiative that was done in the past that somebody talked about with her. I'm not
Mhm.
sure if she was a part of it. I don't want to give false info, but I'm trying my best. But what it was a group of Jewish people, men and women, who came together and went to areas in northern Quebec where people had never seen a Jewish person in person, up close. Um, and if people could come together from different faiths, where they could just go and just talk to people, the
Mhm.
same conversation that I had with the kids in the class. What do you
Yes.
assume about me? Here's the piece of paper, to hold an event. me as a Muslim woman, just giving an example, a person with a kippah, a person with a cross, a person with a hijab, a turban, what do you assume about us? Um, and then have conversations. How many of these are true? How many of these are rooted in who I actually am? And how many are rooted in what people are telling you of what I am? And by
Exactly.
people, I mean representations in the media, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've all seen the lovely representation of Muslims, mostly in the media. Although now there's a lot of talk around the new Miss Marvel, who is a Muslim character, and you see characters and I haven't seen it yet. We should check it out to see what it's all about.
Mhm.
Where there are characters in the show wearing Islamic clothing. They speak a different language. You hear Islamic terminology. This is from what I've read in certain reviews so far, and people are excited about the representation of it. On
Mhm.
the flip side, they're also not happy about the representation of it because, oh, we don't need Hollywood to validate us being, let's say, who we are and what we are. And a lot of people are saying, a lot of artists, Muslim artists, are saying, well, no, this is a great advantage because, for example, we're always seen as terrorists, as the oppressed women or the uneducated fools and the bad guys in the movies. Yet now you have a character who is a superhero of Muslim
Mhm.
background, who's a visible minority. So the upside is great. You have this positive representation of a young girl. She doesn't wear the hijab, mind you, but there are other characters who do. And then, the downside is, well, so what? Like, we don't need Hollywood to validate. There's the Canadian show, The Little Mosque on the Prairie, which is
Mhm.
a really cute, charming show. I watched that. I enjoyed it. It was nice to see us there. Like, they had really nice hijab and matching and colorful, and a doctor. The woman, the female lead character was a doctor, and
Mhm.
interestingly enough, she's a daughter of a convert woman who doesn't wear the hijab, but
Mhm.
was a Canadian convert Muslim. And you
Mhm.
see so many dynamics and different colors of Muslims. You've got
Mhm.
a black hijabi Muslim who owns a cafe, the Cafe Fatima. I remember that. And
Yes.
you've got this young guy of Southeast Asian descent who, is very into high tech and stuff, who wants to be the imam of a local mosque out in the West Prairies. So it was so interesting to see ourselves through some of these characters, and
Yeah.
it's about time, as opposed to seeing us as the sidekick, the terrorist, the oppressed person.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that there's 2 ways to look at, like, what Hollywood is doing in terms of representing us. Yes, we don't need Hollywood to validate it, but we do need
absolutely.
Hollywood to change its ways and stand up for,
And how they present
and
us.
own up to their mistakes, to how they have represented us thus far,
Exactly.
and how they represent us going forward. Um,
Exactly.
but yes, ultimately, we need to have our own platforms. We need to have our own funding. Like, this issue is so big. Like, there's so
Yes.
many layers. Like,
Yes.
do we have proper funding? Do we have proper opportunities to make such blockbuster movies, right?
Yes.
um, to have that platform to kind of have, who's directing this? Is this, I don't know, I have to look into it. Who's writing this? Who's
Yes.
producing this? Where's the
Yes.
funding coming from? All of
Exactly.
these are questions to ask and to look at. But I think that if I actually didn't know that I knew she was of South Asian descent, but I
Yes.
didn't know that she was Muslim. So I have to check it out. But I think that it's actually good that they're changing their ways one movie at a time, I guess.
One movie at a time. I think it's a whole series on Disney Plus, so that's going to be one of our next movie nights, huh?
Yes.
We'll check it out.
Yeah.
We'll give you a critique on that.
Mhm.
And so we want to finish up. I'm very mindful of the time, and we've had such an engaging discussion on how this impacts us on so many levels. I just wanted to wrap up by asking, what is our role as a society, communities, and individuals? And, what is your advice to others who are in similar situations, Fatima?
I think that as individuals, our role is to educate first and foremost ourselves, to educate those around us, to speak out, to use our voice in whatever way that is, um, to stand up for anybody, to hold their hand, if they're going through something like this. People
Exactly.
sending me, even if they weren't able to do anything, to go to protests, to write a letter, even sending that message saying, I stand with you. All of these things was like, there, I'm seeing humanity, I'm seeing what it means
Exactly.
to be human, and I'm learning from all these people.
Yeah.
I think that that's what we can do as individuals, whatever province we live in. Um, as you know, as communities, again, awareness. Um, what are we doing within our own communities? Are we encouraging every member of our communities to speak out against this, to stand with those who are affected, I guess, in whatever way? And as a society, understanding that even if we do not wear a religious symbol, that it affects us because it ultimately leads to a society that's not open-minded and welcoming of people who look um, when I say different, that means there's a norm and then there's all the different ones. I don't want to use the word different, but people who are visibly
Yeah,
practicing a religion.
exactly.
Um, you know, so I think there's a lot that we can all do, and we just need to understand that you know, a fight against any injustice shouldn't be the fights of people who are just affected. People need to stand up. Everybody needs to stand up and say, you know, I don't agree with this. If they don't agree with it, just sympathizing is not enough, right? We need to.
Exactly.
Um, Sometimes it's all we can do, and that's okay. But we need to do what we can do, you know, to stand up against it.
Exactly, because it's one
Yeah.
part of our body is hurting, it's gonna hurt the whole of the body,
Yes,
humanity.
exactly. Yeah, the
Exactly.
Persian poem.
It's a Persian poem. I thought it was a prophetic tradition.
Well, I'm sure it might be rooted in it. The Persian poet Sa'di was Muslim for sure. It might be rooted in traditions,
Yes.
Islamic traditions, but it says translated into English, if I
Well,
remember
tell us in
correctly,
Farsi. Tell us in
in
Farsi first.
Farsi. بنی آدم اعضای یکدیگرند که در آفرینش ز یک گوهرند. چو
Mm.
عضوی به درد آورد روزگار دگر عضوها را نماند قرار.
Bah,
Meaning
bah, bah, bah.
human beings. And I know that it's been translated poetically, like in a rhyming way.
Yes.
If I remember correctly, human beings are members of a whole. Um, in essence, something and soul. I don't
Oh,
remember,
that's
but
beautiful.
and then it says, like you said, if one part is being affected by the pain of the of life, other parts will suffer too. And
Absolutely.
I think that we all just need to understand that we're all connected, that we're not in a vacuum. We're social beings by nature, you know?
Absolutely. And we're gonna be affected when we see these things. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
My dear Azizam,
Mm.
Fatima, Jan, thank you so much. God bless you so much. Thank you for sharing with us. I know this was not an easy thing for you a few months ago to
Mm.
have dealt the way you have through it. And it just shows your strength, your resilience, your warmth, your care. It shows so much about your character that how, in a way, you did represent Muslims out there in such a beautiful way that, although as a human first, like what your student said, you did also represent Muslims in a different way and in a
Mhm.
different light, and how the children responded to it, how their parents, the community, and said, no, this is not okay. This is not who we are as Canadians.
Mhm.
This bill, this law impacts everybody in so many different levels. And, this is, I think having a discussion like this can also hopefully plant the seed for people, the youngsters, the people in positions of power and authority, those who are policymakers, the shakers and the movers, so to speak, that we all have a role to play in this, whether it is from a wellness perspective, from my line of work, for example, educating people how these types of things can impact and hurt people, whether it's from, what we talked about from the movies, the Hollywood, etc., from the social level, from all aspects.
Yeah.
And inshallah, God willing, moving forward, we can have more safe discussions like this, and to help others who are in positions like that. And I pray one day our sisters in France don't have to take off the hijab when going into their position. And also one day for yourself to have your dream job as a teacher, and especially the population that you intend to work with, to help others in such vulnerable positions, and how society looks down on people like that,
Mhm.
right? Again, bless you so much, Fatima. And to
Mhm.
all of our audience members who participated, thank you so much. Bless you. And stay tuned for the next 2 months on The Mindful Muslim, where we do have a set of series coming up in terms of different discussions and so on and so forth, including live in Iraq during the holy times. So thank you very much again. Bless you all. I hope you're having a wonderful weekend. And inshallah, we'll see you soon next month, hopefully, on The Mindful Muslim. Take care, everybody, and peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much. Assalamu
Thank you
alaikum.
too. Wa alaikum assalam.